Great. So welcome again, everybody, and a special welcome to you, Rob. Let me hand over to you to take us on for this first part of the evening.
Excellent, wonderful. Thank you, Bill. I'm going to share my screen, so do let me know if this has worked. I could visibly see a lot of your faces change colour when I did that, which suggests to me it did.
Yeah, that looks fine.
So yeah, wonderful. Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to speak with you today. I'm Dr. Barward-Symmons. I'm Senior Research and Impact Manager at Bible Society. I'm also, as I was explaining at the beginning, for the next week or so, Head of Research at Theos. It's a maternity cover position. I'm not planning on being fired in the next few days. But yeah, really delighted to be able to share with you today some of the findings from a report I co-wrote last year with my colleague Rhiannon, Quiet Revival. Going to go over some of the kind of headline findings, spend a bit of time on some stuff which perhaps hasn't been spoken about so much, but we think is really important. Going to do a bit of a look into the picture within Anglicanism, which is a different picture to the overall one, which we haven't dipped into the report for various reasons, but which I can talk about when we come to it. And then we'll have a bit of an opportunity to look at some other, or I can talk around some other data that's come out since. So just to kick things off, then a bit of background. The Quiet Revival stems from predominantly from two large surveys that we undertook, first in 2018 and then in 2024 with YouGov on a nationally representative sample of adults across England and Wales. And this was predominantly really looking at attitudes and behaviours around the Bible and Christianity. And in that context, church-going is kind of a contextual factor, right? It is important, but it's not the focus. One of the things we come back to is always a reminder: we're not the Church Growth Society, not the Church Statistics. We are the Bible Society, and so really at the heart of this is looking at how people engage with, understand, interact with the Bible. But when the data came in late in 2024, we realised there was a really remarkable story emerging that we needed to share. We wanted to encourage the church to hear and find hope in, but also act on. So what are the headlines? So firstly, and this is obviously the one that's grasped most attention, church-going appears to be rising at a really remarkable rate, particularly among young adults. Secondly, church-going makes a measurable difference, both for individuals and communities. And I've just noticed that typo there, which is irritating. There we go. It's making a meaningful impact. And thirdly, that there is a remarkable level of spiritual openness among young adults. But what we see is both a challenge and an opportunity for the church. So we're going to go through these findings. So firstly, the church is growing, but it's also changing. And the key thing, one of the key things to note here is when we say church-going, we mean people who identify as Christian, self-identify as Christian, and tell us that they attend church at least once a month. This all self-reported, of course, but we used the same approach, same questions in 2018 as we did in 2024. Same sample. So this was the picture in 2018, and it is more or less what you could expect, and it's someone which anyone with kind of quite a loose knowledge of church-going or religion in the UK could have mapped out for you. Older, more common among older people, steadily declining as you go through to younger generations. That was not a surprise, but what we saw in the 2024 picture really was quite remarkable. And this is this big shift to a U shape rather than kind of just a single curve. This this kind of U shape. Yes, you've got the rise most astonishingly in younger adults, but it kind of shows rather than a steady generational decline, we're seeing a generational shift, wherein those younger generations are re-engaging or engaging for the first time in churches, and those middle ages are continuing to pull away, while we also see a rise among the older generation. To be sure of this, we went back and forth with YouGov. We went to check there weren't any methodological issues, there weren't any errors, and they've backed up their data. They've come out and supported their data on multiple occasions. Now, there's obviously been a whole lot of conversation and interest around what's happening with this younger generation. It'd be fascinating to hear some of your thoughts on that. But the shift wasn't only around age, but also around gender. One of the things we saw quite predominantly, again to be expected in 2018, was more churchgoers were more likely to, not only more likely to be older, but more likely to be female. And what we see instead in 2024 is this shift towards younger men in particular. We have seen a rise in young women as well, like that's part of the story. But young men are now more likely to say they go to church regularly than young women. So this is the 2024 data. Beyond that, we're also seeing that the church is continuing to change in other ways. So among churchgoers aged 18 to 54, around a third are from an ethnic minority, and that's compared to only 6% of churchgoers over 55. And you'll see it's double the proportion of the overall population of adults. But we're also seeing this denominational shift. So churchgoers aged 18 to 34, only 20% are Anglican, and that's significantly lower than among older age groups. And churchgoers are twice as likely to say they're Catholic and almost as likely to say they're Pentecostal. Now, this is one of those questions which, it's self-identification. We say, which of the following denominations do you most closely identify with? And so, it's not a kind of exact science. There might be some confusion in some places. People might be attending a church that they don't most strongly identify with. Particularly, there may well be people in Anglo-Catholic churches, but who've been drawn there more through the Catholic route, who identify as Catholic. There may be people in Anglican churches who don't realise it's an Anglican church because it feels so similar to the Free Evangelical Church down the road. It's a complex one. It's all in self-identification. There is a real virtue to doing this approach because it sits alongside other data sources. So, but one of the things we can do is then dip into some of the different denominations. So within Anglicanism, in particular, what is the story emerging? Now, I've put caution here because, as is the case with all of the subgroups, the more you cut them up, the less reliable they become, because the smaller the number of people you're talking about. Okay, so it's why when we talk about young people as a whole, we're more confident than we would be talking about just young men, because you've taken that subgroup and you've halved it. We have a large sample size at the beginning, but it gets smaller and smaller. So Anglicans, it's a kind of smaller sample size, but still wanted to share it with you. So this is the overall picture. Remember, it's this U shape and a clear kind of peak, dip, peak. When we look at Anglicans as a proportion of the population, what you see instead is this kind of is a more consistent. It's more similar to the previous picture, wherein you've got much more likely to be older, and certainly down at those younger groups, we're much less confident to say what's happened there. So the age dynamic on Anglicans does look very different. And when you break it down, when you just look at Anglicans as a whole, what is the Anglican Church looking like by age? You're not seeing that much difference, really. So again, about half are over 65. You got about 20% between 18 and 35. Obviously, this doesn't include children and young people who are actually part of this. So this is among Anglican adults. So sometimes when I've heard people from within the Church of England reflect on our data, that they've perhaps missed this part of the story, that something a bit different is going on within Anglicanism. And I'd love to hear your stories. I've got some theories as to what's happening, but we can come back to that. Because I wanted to talk about some other things going on. Don't just want to do those just attendance charts, because what we're seeing is a really vibrant faith across. This is back to the whole church. So what we're seeing is that among churchgoers, weekly Bible reading is on the rise by quite a significant way. Much more people are saying they read the Bible on average. One stat I saw the other day, which is actually from another piece of research we're doing on a global level, was showing that young Catholics, for example, are much more likely to read their Bible each week than older Catholics. People are engaged. There's rates of belief in God remain high, and one thing I'll come back within the church, we're also seeing that rise beyond the church, which I'll come back to. Nominal Christianity, interestingly, is decreasing. So if people say they're Christian, they're more likely than ever to be active in it, rather than just ticking the box in the form or saying I'm Christian, I'm British, therefore I'm Christian, or whatever it is. And we're seeing a high level of Bible engagement and hunger, particularly among young Christians. So as I say, young Christians are more likely to read the Bible weekly, and they're still hungry to learn more. And Bible confidence, which is something I'm going to touch on briefly later on, is up overall across the church. So the church is growing, but it's also looking more engaged. So the people who are joining, they're not just kind of coming along for the free tea and coffee. They are getting involved and they are believing with their participation. So number two, the church is making a difference. And one thing we see is that church going is making a meaningful impact on individuals. So when you remove all other factors, it seems to be that church going is the thing that makes the difference here. So what we see is churchgoers who are in blue much more likely to say they feel close to people in their local area. They're much less likely to say they frequently feel anxious or depressed, though obviously as those involved in the church, we still want to be conscious of that 31% of people within the church saying they frequently feel anxious or depressed. That's too high a number. Much more likely to say they feel hopeful about their future. Much more likely to say their life feels meaningful. And again, much more likely to say they're happy with their life right now. And again, when it comes to young adults in particular, church going makes a massive difference. So some of these common themes and issues that we're seeing among young adults in our society, church going makes a massive difference there. So 63% of churchgoers under 35, 18 to 35, say they feel close to people in the local area, compared to only a quarter of those who don't go to church. Like, levels of anxiety and depression are much higher among this group across the board, but again, it's lower among churchgoers. Look at that hope difference. And again, look at that difference in finding meaning in their life and feeling positive about their life right now. One of the really interesting things about this, not just for young people, but across the board, is what we see is at the top of these metrics are church-going Christians. Then you get non-religious people. You kind of have to park people from other religions. It's a slightly, we're not confident enough in that, but non-religious people, and those who record lowest on this metric are those who identify as Christian and don't go to church. There's something about putting your faith into practice and it making a difference in your life to really bring out that fulfillment, that fruitfulness in life. But this presents both, or our data, in our data, you can find both challenges and opportunities. So we see some really interesting openness across the board. I'm going to touch on it in a second. As 1 in 5 people, for example, are interested in finding out more about the Bible. That's a huge, millions of people. But the caution to that is that 79% of people in England and Wales hardly ever or never, that's another typo, or never read the Bible. And 7 in 10, or just over 2/3, say they're not interested in finding out more. We have got really excited about this openness and this spiritual hunger and this curiosity. There is still a long way to go. And part of the way to go is to capture that proportion of people who are interested. But this real interest, this real hope and interest comes when we look at young adults. So when we see these 18 to 35-year-olds, we're seeing a spiritually open generation. So in 2018, 28% said they believed in God. That went up to 45%. And that's not just us saying that. There's a wider YouGov tracker which asks that question much more frequently. And 45% said there's probably or definitely a God or gods or some higher power. And when we dig into that a little bit more, we see that a large chunk of them say they believe in a God who has a meaningful impact on their life, or I can't remember the specific phrasing, but it's not just a kind of wishy-washy life force type thing. It's a interventionist, meaningful God. 37% of this generation say they pray at least monthly. When we look at those who say they've never gone to church, a third say they would go if they were invited by a friend. And 25% of non-church goers say they're interested in learning more about the Bible, including a third of young men. There is an enormous amount of opportunity out there. And one of the other things that I've not got on there is close to a half. So 47% of non-church goers believe it is a good thing for Christians to talk about their faith with non-Christians. This is something when we've seen those church-going stats, one of the things that you can do is maybe go, okay, well, they're an increasingly growing but like weird subset that are separating themselves further and further away from society. The reality is it looks more like they're kind of the sharp end of a wedge of wider spiritual openness and curiosity. And some of them have made their way into church, some of them haven't yet, some of them are considering it, some of them are reading the Bible but not yet in church. There is more opportunity ahead. But one of the things we find in the data is that relationships are a key part of that. So we see that across all non-church goers, 19% say they would read the Bible if family or friends recommended it. And only 9% say they would do if it was celebrities or thinkers. Like the impact, I think, of high-profile figures talking more openly about Christianity, social media influencers, is massive. That's been a big part of the shift. But we can't lose track of the fact that still people are more impacted by the people they know or a direct relationship. And it might not even be someone they know that well. Some of the stories we're hearing is it might just be that it was the university chaplain who they met earlier that day or that week, invited them along to church. And because they knew them, they went along. It's the personal relational still makes a big difference. So what's happened since? Before I get onto that briefly, going back to when we first saw the data, and I think I was quoted in the Times the other day saying that I can't remember the exact word, but I was shocked when I saw it. And I was. But the flip side of that was it actually made a lot of sense once I started reflecting on some of the stories that I'd been hearing of, from university chaplains, from people going across churches, and there were a few bits of data that were coming through the UK, but also from overseas, that were pointing this direction, which we thought, okay, maybe there's something to this. We still, as I say, we went back and forth with YouGov to go, are you sure? But there was something it was speaking into. But one of the amazing things this has done is it's triggered a conversation that has spread far beyond the church. So this is just some of the coverage that as I say, the report and the conversation around the report and other things coming up have prompted over the past 9 months. And there's that bit at the bottom. Have young men lost their herd immunity to Christianity? That report was a couple of days ago. There's one from I think there's one from Sky on there from last week. This is growing and growing. And one of the things that's really interesting is this is not just from the religion reporters, right? This is from lifestyle reporters. It's from Glamour magazine wrote about it, and news agents doing their podcast. This is prompting a positive conversation about why our people are being drawn back to church and what difference it's making in their life. One of the challenging things, it has been grabbed by different people to follow different agendas. So that's as I say, a challenging thing. But there's been a lot of conversation in a way that has really allowed for these things to be talked about in a really encouraging way. But it's not just us. It's not just our data. Some things that have come through. So this is where I can use these stories up here around Bible sales. There was a story in March last year about Bible sales going up, which would have been about here, I guess. You see this rise. Then in the past year, it went up even further. What they showed is that between 2018, 2019, and 2024, Bible sales went up by 134%. Now, Bible Society, we've got a great publishing team. We've got the Good News Bible Youth Edition. We've got a few other things that have come out in that time that are brilliant products. But this is not just a case of people buying a second or third Bible because a new fun one has come out. Because we're also seeing things like this is from an Economist article about Google search terms across the West, where there's this rise that continues of interest in the Bible and in Christianity, and they've highlighted COVID, but you can see it continues not beyond. This is from a piece of research by Savanta with Fusion, who work in students, looking at attitudes to the Bible and Christianity among students, and they're seeing this enormous openness. We're seeing a massive rise in adult baptisms, particularly in Catholicism, which is where this data comes from. But we're seeing similar data across France, Finland, Sweden, Ireland, all sorts of places. This data is by a opinion panel called Opinium, another survey company commissioned by King's College London. Young people are much more likely to say they feel thankful to God. We had this piece of research again from Savanta from before Christmas. Gen Z much more likely to say they plan to attend church at Christmas. A massive rise year on year. This piece is from polling agency called Whitestone. Slightly different numbers, but again, you see that U shape of this is about practicing Christian who goes to church or watch online at least once a month. You've got this leak. This is something I came back to. I was talking about earlier, the YouGov rolling question on belief in God. This is just among young adults, and you see this really kind of plateau here, and then something happens in 2022 where there's just kind of been this steady rise of belief in God or gods. And this article in the middle of the West is not losing its religion is by The Economist, and it draws together lots of this data from earlier in the year, and it keeps coming. This is not just us saying this. it's other opinion pollsters, it's coming in hard data. That Bible sales data is not just Bible Society or SPCK saying it. That comes from the like, if you buy a book at Waterstones, it will go on that data. Interestingly, if you buy it from Bible Society, we're too small. We wouldn't be logged on it. It's Waterstones, Amazon, it's W. Smith, things like this. And we're seeing it across the Western world. There's something meaningful happening, and it's showing up in all sorts of data. So just to kind of bring us close to close now, where do we go from here? Well, for us, we're continuing to listen, we're continuing to research, continuing to want to hear stories. But some of the things that have come out for us is, one, how can we prepare for spiritual curiosity? We are, as I say, we're seeing a new kind of landscape of spiritual openness, particularly among young people. There's been a shift in the past 20 years and maybe only 5 years, where we're no longer battling with the kind of enemy of new atheism and these kind of those debates and those kind of questions. Instead, there's a curiosity, there's a comfort, there's an openness towards religion. There's an interest in finding out more. So how do we respond to that? The Bible is, and Christianity is, hot cultural property right now, and people are interested to find out. And it's seen as a credible option for giving their life, like giving some meaning to their life. So how can we be ready for that and speak into that? And the second that we believe is really important in responding to this is improving Bible discipleship, Bible confidence within the church, so that when people come with questions, with curiosities, wanting to learn, we are ready to learn with them and grow with them and learn from them, and not feel kind of afraid of the scriptures as we encounter it. And there are challenges. So young people find, so young Christians in particular, say they say finding appropriate resources is difficult. They also say finding people to learn from is difficult. We at Bible Society have developed the Bible course, which is really well equipped to meet a lot of the needs that have emerged. Many of you will be familiar. We've got a new edition, and that's designed to be done in community with people around you, to where you can share questions. You can. One of the things I love, so Andrew Alton presents. I love Andrew Alton. One of the things I love about a video is that if you put on a video and someone disagrees with it, you can just say that, because you're not saying it to the person who's just delivered a talk. You can just say, disagree with it. We've also just launching the Everyday Faith Bible, which is designed to help people engage with the scriptures for themselves in a meaningful way. I've gone slightly over time. If you want to engage, if you want to find the report yourself, you can scan it there, or we can share it later on. But thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing from you and answering questions later on. But yes, apologies for running over a bit, Bill. But yeah, thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rob. Grand. I'll just pause the recording now. We'll come to question your bit. Thank you.
I'll say thank you again. Thanks for that, Rob. And yeah, it's really interesting in hearing some of the stuff. It kind of really it rings true to where I am. Although I'm not well, actually, part of my where I am is a mission area, a group of 6 churches, and 3 of those are quite rural. One is an ex-mining community, and 2 of them are kind of suburban sprawls, just mass commuter villages. So it's quite a mixed context. But the story I want to tell is of a church, a community, a parish that about 2.5 years ago I was in a meeting that was talking about statistics. and looking at church numbers and the amount of money that comes in and what are we going to do. And I was just there. I was a curate at the time, and I was at a position called curate in charge, and I was in the group of 6 churches that I'm in now, and I was the only person from that area in this meeting. So it was like, tell me about tell me about this particular church. And this particular church building, not the community, is in a lovely farming village, and it's kind of up a hill. It's a beautiful place to walk past, not particularly accessible. People like it for weddings, and kind of a comment was made that, well, it'd be just better if you just shut that building because it's not near where everyone lives. What's the point? There's not many people going. And I remember feeling a little bit hurt because that little community that meet there on a Sunday morning are absolutely beautiful. And it's one of my particular favourites. And about 18 months ago, I had a very sheepish young couple in their early 20s ask if I minded if we could move their wedding forward because the bride was pregnant, and they were really like worried that I'd say no. I was like, of course you can. So about a year ago, this couple got married, did their wedding. It was beautiful. It was so lovely. And when they've been in the church having their bands read, they kind of felt really welcomed, and they've stayed there, and they've become part of the church. And they've now got a little baby, and mum and baby have been baptized, and we're now talking about confirmation. And I think that's really wonderful because actually the people that we're meeting were much older, all retired. And then probably about a year ago, 2 brothers in their early 20s, well, they will just say that they met Jesus. No church background, none of these people any church background. They met Jesus and baptized each other in some water somewhere, and then went down wormholes on the internet trying to find information about Jesus, and then realized they needed to go to church. And so this is the particular church that they chose. And so they've become part of that community. One of their girlfriends now comes. So in the space of, well, in 18 months, this church that someone in a meeting had said, I don't know why you don't just close it, what's the point, has now got 5 young people in their early 20s who are so on fire for Jesus. 3 of them confirmed in October, and one of them already preaching, want to be involved in whatever they can, part of small groups. We run small groups as a mission area, as a group of churches. And I just think it's absolutely wonderful. And it kind of feels like, humans make their plans and then God goes, I'm going to flip that on its head and I'll show you what I'm going to do. And I've not really done much apart from kind of encourage the community there. And they're just really authentic. They just love them. They are hungry to engage with scripture and to learn and grow and serve the community. And it's just happening, on its own. God's kind of just doing it. And we just need to step out of his way and just kind of help the people and point them towards Jesus. So that's basically my little story. And I just think it's wonderful.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. I'll just pause recording. Jim, what about you? Tell us a bit of your stories.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
So I'm Jim. I am the vicar. I'm lucky enough to be the vicar of just one church at the moment, which is a little church in North Sheffield, Christchurch, Hillsborough and Wadsley Bridge. We're a fairly poor area with 3 big estates. I've been here 2.5 years. I used to work for the NHS, and as a keen Christian, used to feel I had to squeeze Jesus in sideways to every possible encounter. But like Helen, my experience of this movement is that I've had almost nothing to do with it, and people rock up to us seemingly of their own initiative. And I thought I would tell 3 stories really briefly, because each one is typical of a slightly larger group and illustrates some things. So I'm going to use names, but they're not the real names. I got back from holiday, I think last summer, to what started off as a really typical email from a lady called Natalie saying, can I book my 3-year-old in for christening? We are next to a Church of England school, and this is a frequent request. But then it changed in the second paragraph and said, while I come, can I bring my 17-year-old son because he's gone religious? And so I met with Natalie and the little girl, and also this 17-year-old apprentice joiner called Harry. And when Harry told me about what had happened, he basically said, I was reading the Bible. My friend gave me one. I was reading a book called Romans, and it told me about what Jesus had done for me. And I loved him. So Harry, I met with him individually. He told a wonderful story about love for Jesus. We baptized him. His mum was so impressed with the change in his life. He had been a very troubled young man, that she too, this is a common theme with families, she too had looked into Christian faith. She's just making up her mind now. Harry illustrates how just reading the Bible seems to be enough for some young people. He also illustrates the problems of the chaotic life of a 17-year-old apprentice joiner. So he's really hungry for input. He came and asked me how he can forgive a group of young men that beat him up when he was 15 and left him for dead. And we talked about forgiveness. He came and asked advice about his girlfriend, who is heading in a really different direction in life. But he almost never comes to church, and he almost never comes to the small groups. And so it's a delight, but it's also a problem. I realize we need to pivot in some way to continue to be helpful in Harry's life as a growing disciple. That's story 1. Story 2, really different. In church one Sunday, and I notice a man of 27 looking physically more up together than the rest of our congregation, but emotionally completely in floods of tears. I'd never seen him before. He's called Sean, and I chatted with him briefly afterwards, and then started meeting with him regularly. And like a few of our young new arrivals, it was YouTubers who had led him to Jesus. So he was looking for truth. He used to think his family told him the truth. That went a bit wrong. And he started reading Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson seemed to keep quoting the Bible. So he looked at some Bible online speakers, including Builder Bob, or Bob from Speaker's Corner, Cliff Nettle, if I'm saying his name right, and Wesley Huff. They're all quite full-on apologists who love a good argument. And he just gradually thought, they can out-argue anybody else because they seem to have something that rings truer than anybody else. And so he came in because he had decided that Jesus was real, and he wanted to know more about him, and he'd never been to a church before. Sean then, unbeknownst to me, decided to go on the Unite the Kingdom march. And so on the Sunday he was away, the 13th of September, a young woman sort of creeps into the back of church, Emma, and she admits that she's Sean's partner, and that she's worried because Sean's gone on the Unite the Kingdom march and she doesn't want him to become a Christian nationalist. Tell us more about what it is that he's believing. And I meet with those two regularly, and the discussion always borders around how this kind of apologetics journey into faith has given Sean a massive appetite for contentious morality, And I'm not yet sure whether Sean is predominantly Christian moralist or actually disciple of Christ, but I'm trying to lead him from one into the other. He's typical of another group. Emma, in the meantime, has given her life to Christ. Amazing. We happened to be preaching on nationalism the day she came in, and I didn't know until afterwards. And then a third story is very incomplete, but the first, another story with a illustrative of a different theme. A lady called Rose. We'd started a little humble toddler and mother group, and God was bringing a little circle of people along. And my dear wife Sonia was leading it for our children's work a couple of weeks ago. And Rose starts up a conversation about baptism with Sonia, and Sonia begins to tell her about what we do for preschoolers. And Rose says, "Oh, it's not for her, it's for me." I've just been off work with what I didn't realize was a kind of long-term response to some childhood trauma. So Sonia gets me to sit down next to Rose, who also has childhood trauma. And Rose tells me about the therapy that she's been having and about how she's dissociated and has been living in fear for years. And we weep a bit. And she says, "But I've been coming along a few weeks and you've been talking about this guy, Jesus, who sounds like he's just what I need." And Rose illustrates a different thing, which is somebody whose life has been really broken, who is looking for something that's solid and can remove fear. What I don't know as we journey forward with Rose, I'm meeting with her on Wednesday and she's going to join our next Seekers course, is whether she'll make that transition from looking for help to being willing to give her whole life over to somebody who has a claim on it. Whether she'll want Jesus a therapist or Jesus a Lord, I don't know. But each of them illustrates a little bit a wider group, and each of them's a little bit different. And each of them I don't quite know what to do with, but each of them God has decided to bring along, so we'll do our best. I think that's what those are the three stories I wanted to tell.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, over to you, Rob.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, I was going to talk about a chap called Andy, who sounds very similar to Sean. I'm 2 months into a new post. I'm in the neighbouring parish to Jim at St John's Overton, which is kind of also Hillsborough. And on week 2, I met a guy, we'll call him Andy, who had walked into church a few weeks earlier and sort of come sporadically, moved up from Essex, similar sort of character, very muscly, probably in our conversation what you call hard conservative, but as we were chatting, profoundly gripped by a sense of kind of guilt that his life wasn't good, if you like, and so we ended up talking, and I said, well, let's meet up. So and what started as as over the 2 months has turned into an every Monday afternoon, and we've been working through John's Gospel through a specific Bible app, and sometimes the conversation is really hard to try and keep him in what I think is on topic, but it's allowed us to talk about all sorts of different things, and try and see where Jesus is in each of these things. Still sort of struggling. It can sort of knows in his mind how grace works, but can't quite. I'm praying that the Holy Spirit would be at work, and he'd see that grace is for him. Extraordinary character. And as one example, we've had another woman who's a bit older, who originally came in with her daughter. Her daughter had asked her to come to church again a few weeks before I arrived, and she herself has been absolutely taken by the Bible, and has been reading voraciously, and the daughter's not come actually. So, and she's probably in her I don't know, late 30s. So we're seeing the same sort of thing. And one last thing is, I was praying with a group of about a dozen ministers last week, and all of us seem to be seeing a greater number of people wanting to join explorer type courses, because most of us are running those in the next couple of months. When I look back and I think back to, we were praying for the same sort of thing about a year ago, and I think my ad hoc evidence, but it looks like numbers are double what they were last year. So what was a sort of, we're doing a course and there are 2 or 3 people, now seems to be 6, 7, 8 people each, where a church is running a course over the next few weeks. So exciting stuff. But all I'm saying is we're seeing it in a really small scale, but we're seeing it as well.
Thank you, Rob. I think maybe to begin with, just say thank you, really big thanks to those who've contributed, which is a number of you, but most obviously to Jim and Helen and to Rob for all that you've shared with us. So many thanks for that. I see various digital applause wafting across the screen there. So many thanks for your input. And also there's comments in the chat, so do have a glance at that if you haven't yet before we finish. Just thought I had, something that I think Rob alluded to 20 years ago. Richard Dawkins and God Delusion was making all the running, and Philip Pullman and his Dark Materials. So quite, forceful atheism was the big thing. It feels like a long time since all that noise and waves were going around. Times change. But then I got thinking, well, in 10 or 20 years time from now, what will the situation be? Will this growth and hunger have grown into a broader movement? I really hope it does. But equally, will some other distraction or twist in our history have sent our culture spinning off in a different direction, and we just don't know. Predicting the future is notoriously difficult. What we do know, of course, is that we're here now. We're living in this moment. So let's give ourselves to it and make the most of it. Joining in what God is doing. So why don't we just close the moment of prayer? And again, in the silence, think of people who've been mentioned, especially the young people who've been mentioned. Most of them with change of names, but that's fine. Just pray for those people for a moment, for God's grace and their ability to receive and respond and be changed by that grace. And now take a moment to pray for ourselves and for God's grace for us in our response to this and our ministry, in spite of our weaknesses, our limitations, which we're very aware of, but that God will continue to use us in this moment and in ways that are a blessing to others. And as you pray for yourself, maybe have a look at the screen and see whoever Zoom in its infinite wisdom has placed next to your face on the screen, then pray that for them particularly as well. And then just to close, why don't we do the chaotic Zoom grace? If you would like to unmute, and we'll do that chaotic grace where the time lag makes it all very messy, but we hear each other's voices, which is the thing that matters. So let's pray the words of the grace for each other. So may the grace
of the Lord Jesus Christ,
the
love of God,
and the
fellowship
fellowship
of the Holy Spirit,
be with us all,
evermore and evermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.